In this video, I'm going to show you how to take a Google Sheet and import it into Pyret so that it can be used in Bootstrap data science. Now, I've created a sample spreadsheet here, but this could be any sheet that you generate from a Google form or that you've copied and pasted from somewhere else. The first thing to look at is the tabs down at the bottom. We've created two different tabs here, one called Data, which contains all the information we want kids to analyze, and another called README, which contains a little bit of descriptive information about the dataset. So let's start there. A README tab should usually say when and where and how the data was collected. If you got it off the web, maybe a little note about what web address this data was scraped from. And often, a lot of data sets, their columns are a little more complicated. They're not totally intuitive. And so you may have definitions for each column here, like a little dictionary or a code book for what the columns mean. In our case, the column names I've chosen should be self-explanatory. So let's go back to the Data tab. And this is something, you can rename these tabs by double-clicking and renaming them however you like. So here's the data. Now, I have intentionally messed up 3 values in this spreadsheet in order to illustrate 3 common problems. I'd like you to hit pause and go searching for which 3 cells you think are problematic. I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. So the first problematic cell is in column D. It's blank. That makes it incredibly difficult to analyze. You never want to have a blank cell in your data. The other 2 problems are a little more subtle. Both of them are in column B. So here's one of them. It's not blank, right? This kid just wrote, "I feel old." Well, the problem with that is this column is supposed to be full of numbers, and trying to average all of those numbers is going to fail the moment it comes to this value. So they have to be of the right type. Finally, we have this cell here. It isn't blank, and it is a number, but it's also kind of junk data. We don't know how this data got entered, but we know there isn't a 144-year-old kid answering a survey. Maybe it's a 14-year-old whose thumb slipped and they hit the number 4 twice. Maybe it's a precocious 12-year-old who decided they were going to answer, but in months instead of years. The fact is, we don't really know what the problem is, but we know we can't use this data because that's going to completely throw off our analysis. So in a real data set that you collect, you want to make sure these mistakes don't happen to begin with. In my case, I forced the mistakes, and I can just undo them to bring us back to regular clean data. So we've got our 2 tabs. Our data looks good. Now we want to make sure that when we go to the sharing settings, anyone on the internet with this link can view the spreadsheet, because that's how Pyret's going to do it, just with the link. So once that's done, we're going to go over to the blank starter file. This is linked from the Bootstrap data science materials, and it's easy to find. In this blank starter file, we've got some nicely formatted comments to show students where to define subsets, helper functions, and rows. But what we want to do is fill in some of the blanks up here. The first one is the file ID of the spreadsheet. How do I get the file ID of my sheet? Well, every Google Sheet up at the top in the address bar has a long gobbledygook of numbers and letters that's sandwiched in between 2 forward slashes. So here's one. I'm going to copy and paste it here, leaving the quotes because it has to be a string. And now it's got that file ID. The next thing is to list all the columns with commas between them. So here are my columns. And maybe for now, I'll just start by copying and pasting them. So let's see, it needs to have commas. So there we go. So this is a decent start, but I think we can do a lot better. First, when I'm thinking about my students, a lot of them have typos. That's just really common. And it could be a typo where they forgot whether something needed to be capitalized or not. So instead of capital A age, I'll just say everything is lowercase. And for student ID, I can make that even shorter, right? Less room for error. I'll change it to ID. So these are a lot easier for kids to use than the other titles. This column has its own problem. For one thing, in Pyret, columns cannot have spaces in them. So we need a concise, no space title for this. How about eye color? Much more readable, much more usable. And these names are what my kids are going to use when they're programming. And they can coexist alongside the original names in the spreadsheet. So I can leave these as they are. The final thing we have to do is identify which tab has all of our data, right? Where on the bottom left has our data. And in our case, well, good thing we chose a good name. It's literally just called data. And that's it. So we'll click run, and let's see if it's loaded the spreadsheet. So far, so good. According to this code, we called it my-table. And here we are. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, you can always ask us on the forum at discourse.bootstrapworld.org.